Hey everybody. So this video lesson is going to cover introductions. Uh, Hopefully you've already gone through the PowerPoint and the handout in the video lesson for thesis statements. So we're going to move on and talk more about the introduction as a whole. So in that PowerPoint on introductions and thesis statements, we learned that an introductory paragraph often contains 5 moves. What they call it. The first is grabbing the reader's attention, then leading into the topic and stressing its importance, and then providing background information, indicating your purpose with the essay, and then stating your main point. 3 of those moves are essential for an introductory paragraph. The 3 moves that every intro should really have is grabbing the reader's attention. If you don't grab your reader's attention, then they're not going to read the rest of the essay. So that is super important. The next one is your lead-in. You have to take that attention-getting device and then transition your reader into the rest of your introduction. That's what we call a lead or a lead-in, right? And then you have to state your main point, which is the thesis statement. So we've already talked about thesis statements, which typically come at the end of your introduction. So let's go back and look at how to start your introduction. On the PowerPoint, slide number 5 lists several things that your grabber is supposed to do. The first is grabbing the reader's attention. The second is relating it to the topic in some way. However it is that you get your reader's attention, it has to connect to your topic. It can't just be a random way of getting their attention. And then the grabber also needs to allow for a smooth transition into your lead and main point, right? What is the lead then? Okay, so we grab their attention. Then how does the lead-in work? Well, after you've hooked them, you then are going to use a whole different variety of techniques that are going to connect your grabber to your main point. So your lead is that connection, right? You got their attention, and at the end of the introduction, you're going to tell them what your main point is. You're going to give them your thesis statement, and then they're going to go into the rest of the essay. Your lead is the bridge between the two, right? So your lead will provide the context of your topic. So however you got their attention, you're then going to go into more specifics on what your topic is and why you're writing about it. You might provide some background information in this section of your intro, although it's not always necessary to provide background information. Really just depends on what type of essay you're writing. It should somehow stress the importance of your topic, the relevance of it. Why should your reader care about this topic? You got their attention, so now you want to keep their attention. You want to make them feel like they have a stake in this topic and they should keep reading. So your grabber hooks them, your lead keeps them, it sustains their interest, and then your thesis statement prepares them for the rest of the essay. So that's how your introduction should function, right? Get their attention, explain why it's important and why they should care, give some context, maybe background information, and then end the introduction typically with your thesis statement, whatever your main point is. But let's talk a little bit about ways that you can grab your reader's attention, because that's easier said than done. So this will take us to the handout on writing introductions. Looking at that handout, a lot of the information on the first page we've already talked about with the PowerPoint. So you want to make sure you have a strong introduction and a strong conclusion. We're going to talk about conclusions in the next video. But you want that introduction to be as solid and strong as you can possibly get it. It really sets the tone for the whole essay, and it can determine whether or not someone's going to continue reading the essay. So you really want to work on having a strong one, but don't necessarily worry about it being strong at the beginning of your drafting process. It is not uncommon for people, professional writers even, to write a very brief introduction just to get themselves started and then focus on the body of the essay, and then you can come back and tweak that introduction to make it stronger and make it truly fit what you did in the rest of the essay. So it's okay. It happens, it happens to appear at the beginning of your essay, but oftentimes it's not what you work on first. So work on having a strong one though, and you want to kind of stick to the rule that your introduction and conclusion are going to each be about 10% of your overall essay in terms of like word and length. That's not a hard rule, but it's a pretty common rule. So you want to kind of think about keeping them both around the same length, right? If you have this really long introduction and this really short conclusion, it will make the essay seem very off balance and vice versa. So think of them both as equal weighted bookends, if you will. So we have focused on thesis statements. So let's take a look at some ways to get your reader's attention. So on that handout for writing introductions, when you get to page 2 of it, you'll see examples of grabbers and attention getters. So we're going to go through these and pay attention to these because some of them can be really effective. And if you have this tool to come back to, especially if you're struggling to open up your essay, come back and refer to this and try using one of them. It might help you and get you over that hump, if you will. So the first type of attention getter that I've listed, I just call it a general introduction. So the example here says, any person who has lived in the 20th century has seen a lot of changes take place in almost all areas of human existence. Some people are excited by the challenges that these changes offer. Others want to return to the simpler style of the past. The 20th century has certain advantages, such as a higher standard of living for many, but it also has some disadvantages, such as a polluted environment, the depersonalization of human relationships, and the weakening of spiritual values. So we've got a pretty strong introduction there. They laid everything out for us. We know exactly what their purpose is and what their main point is, and even what their body paragraphs are going to consist of. The reason I call this a general introduction, though, is because they didn't really do anything, I don't want to say they didn't do anything special with their grabber, but they didn't necessarily need to do anything special. So this type of introduction typically works best when you are dealing with a topic that is universal, that nearly every person reading it is going to connect to, they're going to relate to, they're going to understand, and it's an immediate recognition for them. So when you are dealing with a topic that you already know everybody is familiar with, you might not need to take any extra measures to get your reader's attention, right? I always try to shy students away from using a general introduction, though, because it's never a bad thing to make sure you're going to grab your reader's attention. Even if you think your topic is relatable enough that people are going to gravitate towards it immediately, why not go ahead and use another technique to get their attention, and that way you know for sure you're going to hook them. So the second type of grabber that's listed on the handout is using an anecdote. So an anecdote is just a small story, and it's usually like a true life story, something that's actually happened, not necessarily to you, but maybe, but it's just a brief true story that, again, has to relate to your thesis. It has to relate to your main point in some way. All right, so this example here says, in the spring of 2011, I had just returned home from parent-teacher conferences to find my dad's dog missing. We had been watching him for several days and had allowed him to go in and out with the doggy door because we knew we would be gone all day and did not want him to go pee in our house. It was 8:00 p.m. and roughly 25 degrees outside. We spent the whole night out walking, calling for him, driving around the neighborhood, and hanging missing dog signs. This experience prompted me to want others to be aware of the requirements necessary when dog sitting. In order to survive dog sitting, one must have a safe place for the dog, establish dominance over the pet early on, and understand the diet and exercise requirements of the pet. Right? So the true story that she opens with, losing her dad's dog, directly relates to the purpose and the main point of the essay, right? So if you can come up with a little story like that, that would, we're all kind of drawn in by stories naturally. So if you can start with some type of anecdote that directly relates to your purpose and your main point, then that's a fairly good way of getting your reader to want to keep reading. The next grabber is statistics. So you're going to begin your introduction by quoting some startling or interesting numbers and facts, and again, directly related to your thesis. So this example says, according to an article in Family Safety and First Aid published by Berkeley Books, every 45 seconds a fire breaks out in an American home. 700,000 residences aflame each year, and 16 times a day somebody dies in one of these burning homes. These statistics are frightening and should not be taken lightly. The best way to deal with the possibility of loss from fire is to plan ahead before it happens. Otherwise, it is too late. In order to not become one of these statistics, Americans need to equip their homes with safety devices, set and adhere to safety rules, and practice a family escape plan in order to protect their families, right? So in this case, the statistics that were quoted at the beginning directly related to the thesis, right? And the thing with statistics is if you choose the right ones, they really can be sort of eye-opening for your reader. So if you can get them to be like, holy cow, then you've already got them, right? But two things about using statistics as your grabber. The first is make sure it is directly related to your purpose and your main point, right? And the second thing is probably even more important. Don't overdo it with the statistics, right? You want to make sure that you use just enough to make your point and to have an effect, but not too much where people are going to get lost in the numbers, where the data is so overwhelming or so confusing that they're like, I don't even know what that says, and they just put it aside and keep moving on with their day. So they can be very effective, but use them carefully, right? So the next type of grabber is one of my favorites, and it's the question. So you literally begin your introduction with a question that somehow relates to your main point, right? So this example, have you ever wanted to play a sport that is fast and requires a lot of skill? Have you ever wanted a competitive game that involves a lot of endurance? If you have, then lacrosse is a great sport for you. It is a game of thrills and excitement that can focus your mind and push your body. Lacrosse is a great sport because of the game's speed, the aerobic endurance needed to play, and the strategies involved in gameplay, right? So the question here, have you ever wanted to play a sport that is fast and requires a lot of skill, directly relates to that thesis statement, which is why lacrosse would be a great sport for you to play. So the connection there is very clear. The cool thing about a question, though, is we're kind of programmed to automatically try to answer a question. So when we hear a question or read a question, it's like our mind can't help but try to come up with an answer. So once you've asked the question, your reader's automatically going to say that question to themselves as they're reading it, and then more than likely kind of come up with an answer in their head, whether they're conscious of it or not. So it's a nice way to just use our natural inclination to your advantage, right? So it's a very effective technique. Just make sure it's a question that makes sense and that relates to your thesis. Another way that you can grab your reader's attention, the next type is using current events, right? So this is, you want it to be something that was current enough and well known enough that your readers are going to recognize whatever you're referencing. So any well-known recent event, and it doesn't have to be worldwide or nationwide. It could be, statewide or, city-wide, even community-wide or school-wide, depending on who your audience is, right? But anything that has recently happened that connects to your thesis, you can use that to your advantage. People are automatically going to recognize it. They're already going to have feelings about it, right? Opinions about it. So this example says, this morning's news reported that a young girl, age 5, was abducted from her classroom. As a frantic search ensued, people across the Philadelphia area were shocked to find that the kidnapper walked right into the child's classroom and demanded that the young kindergartner leave with the woman. The child managed to escape and was found, but she had been attacked by her captors. Obviously, safety procedures broke down and this poor child paid the price. In order to assure the safety of all children, schools across the country must review safety procedures, tighten safety protocols when necessary, and assure all staff members are properly trained, right? So they're taking that current event that everybody's going to be aware of and already have thoughts and opinions about, and they're using that to create a connection with the reader, and it does directly relate to the main point of the essay. A lot of times that's why the current event technique works, is because more than likely that's the whole reason you chose to write on the topic, is because it's something that has recently been a topic of interest for people. So that can be very effective too. The next type of grabber is the quote. So you begin the introduction with a famous or compelling quote that relates to your thesis. So one thing here with using a quote, make sure that either the author of the quote is well known, or the quote itself is so intertwined with your main point that it doesn't matter if the author isn't as well known. But you run a fine line with using quotes, because people don't always recognize who said it. They don't always recognize the name. They may not understand right away how it relates to this essay. So you have to be very clear when you're using this type of grabber. But the example here says, the author, Aldous Huxley, once said, "To his dog, every man is Napoleon," hence the constant popularity of dogs. As you consider the pet you would like to have share your life, it is Huxley's quote that sums up why a dog is the best choice. Because of its sense of loyalty, its ability to protect you, and its great companionship, a dog is the perfect pet. I think we looked at this actually as an example of a strong thesis statement as well on that handout, but I used it again here because it does use that quote from Aldous Huxley. And if you don't know who that is, he's a famous author. But even if you don't, the quote is easy to relate to, right? And it does directly relate to the main point of the essay. So you can use a quote if you think it's appropriate and you really think it's going to get their attention and help lead you into your main point. The last type of grabber that's discussed on the handout is the what if grabber. This is very much like an anecdote in that it's story-like, except in this case, it's not a true story. It's not something that has actually happened. You are getting your reader to imagine it happening, what if, okay? So if you can get them in that first sentence, having them imagine something happening, then they're already invested. They're probably going to keep reading, unless you're having them imagine something really weird or really awful. Then it might backfire. But in this case, it works. So the example here Imagine you are taking a math test, but you just cannot concentrate. What you really need is a piece of gum to chew so that you can chew on that difficult problem involving the slope equation that you cannot possibly remember. Everyone wants the refreshing piece of gum in his or her mouth during school. The controversy in schools today, however, is that students are not allowed this luxury. Students face punishment and are accused of creating a dirty school environment because of gum chewing. However, schools should allow students to chew gum because it can help students perform better on tests, it increases student concentration, and it increases student participation in class. I think we've looked at this example too with the thesis statements handout, but I think it's an effective use of the what if technique, right? Imagine you are taking a math test, but you just cannot concentrate. Hello, yes, been there, right? A lot of people will relate to that very first sentence. And then you move on, maybe a little bit surprisingly, to this idea of chewing gum in order to concentrate better. And that's kind of intriguing. And it leads right into the purpose and the main point of the essay. So using a what if scenario can be very effective. Just make sure that you're not manipulating your reader and not being too busy with their emotions, right? Because that can be a turnoff. So you have all these different techniques that you can use to try to grab your reader's attention. This is not an exhaustive list of possible grabber techniques. You might come up with something truly fantastic and original. That's great. But if you struggle with your introduction, come back to this, because, see which one might make the most sense with the essay that you're writing. Play around with them, and decide which one is ultimately going to work best. And we're going to talk more about this in the next video, but the cool thing about using these techniques for your introduction is it sets you up for your conclusion as well. We'll talk more about that in the next video, but in summary here, for writing a good introduction, you want to make sure you grab your reader's attention, possibly using one of these techniques. You want to lead them into your main point after that. So your lead in is where you are going to provide the context of your topic, possibly some background information, and you're going to somehow indicate your purpose, like why you're writing about this topic. That's all the middle part of your introduction. And then the third thing for your intro is that thesis statement that we talked about in the previous lesson, what your main point is and what the body of your essay is going to discuss, right? So keep these techniques in mind, and remember too that, your introduction does not have to be set in stone from the beginning. You don't even have to have one in the beginning of your drafting process. Some people do fine jumping right into their first body paragraph and then completely creating the introduction after the fact. Other people are like, I have to have something there in order to get started. So go ahead, write a little brief introduction and then move on to the rest of the essay. Come back to it afterwards and tweak it and fine tune it. But make sure that however your process works, that you have an introduction that covers at least those three main elements of a strong intro. So now go ahead and read through the handout for conclusions and watch that video lesson as well.